I begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful, and peace and blessings be on the best of His creations and the chief of His apostles. I begin with greetings of peace and blessings, or as we say in the Islamic tradition, Assalamu alaikum. Today I want to pose amongst the most fundamental questions that every single human being asks one or another time in the midst of their lives. While it's a question that is so deep and that is so profound and can be reflected upon through a variety of different levels, for most people it's something that we probably take and push to the side and marginalize because we don't want to, in reality, put forth our effort toward finding an answer. The question is, why did God create me? What is my purpose in this world? Where did I come from? Where am I going? What's my objective? Where is my final destination? Imagine for a moment if we all leave this place of worship in a couple of hours and we go back to our homes. And as we're opening up the door to our homes, we find a bag or a briefcase. And in it, it says your name. You open it up and you see stacks of $100 bills. The first question that probably anyone would pose is, where did this come from? Before we think about what am I going to do with it, you want to make sure it didn't come from any sort of drug cartel or anything like that, obviously. You want to make sure that that cash is legitimate because we have a lot of aspirations in terms of what we want to do with it. The first question that we pose is, where did it come from? And then you'll have to go out and make an effort toward finding where it came from before you go out and spend it. God gave every single one of us 60, 70, 80 years of life in this world. Before we decide what we're going to do with it, we have to come to the realization that it came from Him. And in the same way that you find $1 million by your front door, at the very least your responsibility is to thank you, is to offer a thank you to the one who has given that to you. Then on that same objective, we need to also be people who are thankful to God for giving us this blessing, because in reality, there is just that much potential within it. And when posing this question, why exactly did God create me and what is my purpose? Before we go ahead and try to answer that question, we need to answer a couple of questions as prerequisites toward that main question, again, which is, why did God create us? And the question that we need to pose before that is, why do we even need to ask that question? Wouldn't it just be okay if we resumed our lives? But before we even pose that question, we need to pose another question, and that is, who exactly do I ask that question to? Do you go to your religious leader and ask, why did God create me? Do I ask my mom? Do I ask my dad? Why did God create me and what's my purpose in this world? If I have a question about Romeo and Juliet, the best person to ask is William Shakespeare himself. If you have a question in regards toward a particular film, the best person to ask is the director of that film. When I want to pose that question of who exactly am I to ask when I'm trying to contemplate upon my purpose in this world, got to go straight toward God. And again, before I answer that question, I have to answer another prerequisite. And that is, what's the purpose in asking that question anyway? Naturally, if we as a human being set goals for ourselves, and we come toward finding or aspiring toward reaching an objective, there is just that much more potential for us to reach that final destination. If when I'm beginning my undergrad, I decide that I want to become a doctor, and I keep on telling myself I want to become a doctor, there's a very good possibility I'm going to end up being a doctor. Otherwise, you might end up like me and end up as a theologian. God knows that's not that much fun. But if you keep on telling yourself and you set a goal and you work toward it for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, eventually you're going to get to what you want to achieve. Which is why if I ask that question of why exactly do I need to even pose the question toward God, oh God, why did you create me? Once I know the answer, I begin to work for it. And you correct me if I'm wrong, or let us think about it for just a second, for just a moment. I'm pretty confident to say that every single person in this world, regardless of whether you are a believer in one faith tradition or not, probably at least once in your lifetime, this question pops up into your mind and overtakes your heart and overtakes your soul. What am I even doing here? For the majority of people, we take that question and we sideline it. And we say, I don't have the time to worry about answering that question because there's a Super Bowl to watch today. And who wants to think about such an important fundamental question? Imagine, for instance, you go to sleep tonight and you wake up tomorrow next to the Great Wall of China. The first question you're not going to ask is, where's the closest Starbucks because I need my morning pike roast? It's going to be, what the hell am I doing here? We need to be able to pose that question and not forget about it, but put it to the forefront of every single day of our lives so that we're able to work on it. And that brings me toward the last part, or toward, in reality, the third question, which is the real question that we want to pose then. Why did God create us? And let me just say that I know that this is the second in a series of sermons titled Reaching for God, where we go ahead and take a look at different religious traditions and see how we as believers of a particular faith tradition do our very best to reach for God. But in reality, instead of looking upwards and reaching for God, we're often reaching across the table so we can throw a punch to someone who has a completely different interpretation of God than us. When in reality, we see that many of us who are here today are all here for the same purpose. And God created every single one of us for the same reason. Within the Islamic tradition, there's a verse within the Quran which states that God did not create humanity nor any other creation except for the purpose of worship. The fact that we are here in a state of worship is one dimension of the reason why God created us. But Muslim theologians and philosophers, scholars of ethics and spirituality, have long reflected on the meaning of what worship means, because if God only created us so that we stand and that we bow and that we prostrate in the way that Muslims do, is that really what God wanted from us? In a Quranic anecdote in chapter 2, it brings forth the scene of the beginning of creation. God has created thousands upon thousands of angels. And in the Islamic tradition, angels are seen as creations of God who follow the instruction of God and don't have any sort of free will. So when God tells them to pray, they pray. When God tells them to praise Him, they praise Him. If God tells them to jump, they jump. If God tells them to sit, they sit. And in the Islamic tradition, in this particular Quranic anecdote, God, He looks toward the angels and He says, "Oh angels, I'm here to tell you that I'm going to create a creation that is different than you. I'm going to create the human being." And the angels pose a question toward God. Perhaps not out of their own free will, but perhaps because God told them to ask that question. Because as we mentioned, angels don't have that free will. And they say, "Oh God, why would you create a creation that's going to cause so much corruption, that's going to cause so much bloodshed. They knew what was going to happen. And they see, and we see the world today through these eyes, and we hear awful things. And every single day we're receptive to barbaric images of violence and of rape and of poverty and of homelessness. And those angels said, "Oh God, why are you going to create a creation that is going to cause corruption and cause so much bloodshed?" To which God responded in this Quranic anecdote that I know something that you don't know. Because amongst this creation, for the homelessness and for the poverty and for the corruption and for the bloodshed, there are going to be a few jewels. There are going to be a few stars. There are going to be a few individuals from amongst those of my creation known as the human being who have potential to be far greater than you, O angels. For you just pray and you just prostrate and you follow my instruction, but they will do something that is more significant than just that act of prayer. They're going to go out into their communities and they're going to make changes. And they're going to be the glimmer of hope and of love and of mercy and of compassion and of justice and of patience that this world so desperately needs. Because of them, I've created all of you to sift through which one of us is going to reach that high and make that change in community and in society. We need to be a people who are in a state of contemplation, who are in a state of reflection, who are always thinking, pondering, and putting to the forefront of our minds that same question. Why did God create me? What is my purpose in this world? What is my destination? Where did I come from? Every single day, if we center ourselves and we put into perspective those questions, and then we try to internalize them and become empowered by internalizing those questions, we will find, God willing, ourselves to be those standard bearers of that mercy and of that love and of that compassion and of that justice and of that patience and of that beauty that God desires for us to illuminate every single day of our lives. Thank you very much, and God bless. Thank you very much.